Allah, ladies and gentlemen, beyler, bayanlar, Sayyidati, Sadati, welcome to this session, International Gas Trades and its Demands. I'm Sami Zaidan, Senior Presenter from Al Jazeera International. I have the privilege and the pleasure of being the moderator for this session. If I may start by inviting our distinguished panel of speakers to come up and join us here on the stage. We're delighted to be joined by Akito Matsumoto, Senior Economist of the IMF. Please come up, sir. Belhaifa Mahjouba, Head of Gas Market Analysis, the Department of GCF, Algeria. Dr. Jan Frederik Braun, Strategic Energy Analyst, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies at the Netherlands. Mr. Robin Mills, the CEO of Qamar Energy in the UAE. Gulmira Lazayeva, Research Associate of the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies in the UK. And Dr. Oleksiy Ivchenko, the former president of Naftogaz, the Ukraine. And welcome to all of our attendees. This session is devoted to discussing the international gas trade and its demands. We're delighted to have a panel of speakers who will address us shortly on the striking developments which this industry has been witnessing. I should point out at the beginning that today's session is taking place thanks to the partnership with the Al Attiyah International Foundation for Energy and Sustainable Development. So I feel a brief background about His Excellency Abdullah bin Hamad Al Attiyah is in order. His Excellency has a unique background, having occupied senior positions in both the energy industry as well as world-class initiatives to protect the environment. Among the positions which he has served in include as Minister of Energy and Industry of the State of Qatar, Chairman of Qatar Petroleum Company, one of the state's leading petroleum companies, and even Deputy Prime Minister of the State of Qatar. On the other hand, he was elected in 2006 as Chairman of the UN Commission on Sustainable Development and President of the UN Climate Change Conference at COP18. I think you'll agree with me that it is indeed rare to find a person who has served in both the energy industry and in international efforts to protect the environment. It is indeed with this insight that the Abdullah bin Hamad Al Attiyah International Foundation was established as the world's first and only independent international energy and sustainability think tank. The world, our environment, and our common humanity is indeed indebted to His Excellency for his selfless effort to bridge the energy industry with efforts to preserve our common natural habitat. The gas market and the international trade in gas that we seek to discuss today has transformed considerably over the last few decades. Europe has become more reliant on imports as pipeline projects are in the process of establishing new routes to take Russian gas to the continent. And the European market is witnessing increased competition from LNG supplies from Qatar and the USA. Meanwhile, gas finds in the Eastern Mediterranean are promoting hopes, even plans for the establishment of gas trading hubs from Egypt to Cyprus, Turkey, and Greece. These are some of the issues our distinguished panel of speakers may cover in their presentations today. We will hopefully have some time for questions too from the audience related to the topics that we're discussing today. I would like to remind everybody at this point to please put your telephones on silent. Feel free to take notes during the presentations. And as I said, if you have a question at the end, please raise your hand. We will try and get a microphone to you. We'll remind everybody once again that we will love to hear your questions, but those related to the issue that we're discussing here today, since we do have only, unfortunately, a limited amount of time for that. I will be helping the panelists during their 10-minute presentation with time management, and we'll periodically give them notes to let them know how we're doing on time. But without further ado, I'd like you to join me in welcoming up to the podium, first of all, Mr. Akito Matsumoto, senior economist at the IMF in the USA. Let's welcome him.
Thank you, everyone, coming here. My name is Akito Matsumoto. I'm a senior economist at IMF. I'm covering commodity market, and especially that in the commodity market, I'm covering energy market. So today I'm going to talk about energy demand and income. So energy demand depends on, of course, population. There are more people. Of course, there are more consumption of energy. The land area is bigger, then they tend to use more energy because they need to transport more. And income, usually high-income countries tend to consume more energy. So this is true, but how income growth can affect energy demand, actually it has a little bit of question here. So before going to the detail of this income and energy demand, I have to talk about a little bit about S-shaped energy and income relationship. So suppose that you want to have a car or air conditioner or refrigerator. As your income grows, you tend to have one unit of car per household or one refrigerator in your house. But you're not going to have two or three, even if you're getting richer and richer. So this makes it that your income goes up, you're not going to get more refrigerator or car. So this makes it a S-shaped relationship between your income and the ownership of particular goods, especially durable goods that consumes energy. And if you look at the high-income countries' energy demand, it looks like they don't consume more energy just because they're getting richer. So this picture depicts that the United States, Germany, and Japan's energy consumption on y-axis. This is per capita. And on the x-axis, this GDP per capita, which is income. So Japan, which is relatively, the poor at 1970s, when you're getting a little bit, when that Japanese income getting higher to catch up to 1990s, their energy consumption goes up. But then after that, it's actually started even declining. That's also true with that Germany and the US is typically flat. This is per capita. So if there's population growth, of course, there's the energy demand growth from that one. Why there's energy demand isn't growing in the high-income country? Of course, it's energy efficiency. Even if they become rich, when their energy efficiency is improving, then they don't have to consume as much energy to make your economy richer. Or even if you have more income, you're going to use less energy. This is coming from you tend to use more energy efficient stuff. Instead of using Edison light, you can use compact fluorescent light, or you can use LED. The other thing is that you can switch from gasoline engine to EV. Or you can change power plant, coal from natural gas. That makes energy efficient. So these things is the underlying number of this energy efficiency gain. So it's getting much better compared to the 70s. So why energy demand is not growing in the high-income country? Population growth is slower. Energy efficiency gain is strong, which is negative effect of the energy demand. and income growth is slow. But this is actually still positive effect. So overall flat demand that you saw a little bit ago, like this figure, it's coming from these three factors. So income growth impact on energy demand is positive, as I said. So there's saturation factor is working, but it's still positive. But what that means in actual reality in terms of numbers. So if you look at this picture, that the richer country like Japan, US, France, if you adjust it for the energy efficiency gains, so assume there's no energy efficiency gains at all, then when your income increase, then your energy demand increase, like its picture. So we're gonna see at some point, which is like 160,000 per capita income level, then you're not gonna have a higher income growth doesn't imply higher energy demand. So you might gonna see that the energy demand not growing for the high income country, but this takes at least 20 years for the Germany. And of course, there's a lot of middle income country. So in terms of energy demand, we may gonna see saturation, but that's far future. So in the 100-year scale, we have to worry about this and its impact on each energy. But for next 20 years, this is not a big issue. So if you look at emerging economy, of course, it's growing. So this is energy consumption. This is the same figure that we show it. I showed it a little bit before. Japan, Germany, US, it's flat, but Turkey, it's red on the left-hand side of figure. Its income is growing, and energy consumption is growing as well. So it's not going to flat surface for next 20, 30 years for sure. So this is the fact that it's middle income country is the source of energy demand growth, even with energy efficiency gains. So this is a little bit more low income country side that in the beginning, of course, that the low income country, they use biomass. And if you look at biomass consumption and income, it's completely negative slope. So of course, low income country uses more biomass. Higher income country doesn't use biomass. Of course, the richest country in this figure is Qatar, and they don't use biomass. And this is this pattern of energy mix among income level is quite broad, quite depend on the country's characteristics as well. But in general, we can still say that middle income countries start using more coal, more oil, and this is coal for electricity, oil for transportation. High income countries, they start using more natural gas for electricity and renewable for electricity, and oil usage is for petrochemical industry. And of course, natural gas is for petrochemical industry use as well. So there's energy mix that it depends on the income level. So let me conclude that the energy demand and high income countries relation, energy demand and income relation. So high income country, the energy income growth is flat now, and income growth effect, which is still positive, offset by the energy efficiency gain. And population growth is almost negligible, and in some cases it's negative. So energy demand is not coming from high income country. So this energy income demand growth coming from middle income country. Income level also affect the energy mix, middle income country growth. So in that process, that the demand for natural gas and renewable are expected to increase. And if in our detailed analysis that featured in the World Economic Outlook in October that from IMF, we documented that we don't see that this energy saturation effect of natural gas from historic data, that we see that the flat curve and adjusting for the energy efficiency gains, but we couldn't find this effect on the natural gas. So natural gas, at least in our sample, it's growing, and we don't see that saturation effect. So we're going to pass the discussion about gas demand to the other experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Akito Matsumoto. Beautifully timed there. Let me give you your iPad back. Thank you, sir. Wonderful. A lot of issues raised there for us to think about, but as we think about it, let's move straight on. We're delighted to invite to the podium our next speaker. Join me in welcoming Belhaifa Mahjouba, Head of Gas Market Analysis Department at GECF in Algeria. Let's welcome her.
Thank you very much, Sami. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, allow me to express my gratitude to Al Atiyah Foundation and to the organizers of this important summit for inviting gas exporting countries forum to share our views on gas market. So I am Mahjouba Belhaifa. I am working in I'm head of gas market analysis department in the GECF, which is Gas Exporting Countries Forum. Before joining the forum, I was working in Sonatrach, the oil and gas company in Algeria. So the presentation will cover some dynamics of the gas market with a focus on gas demand, the challenges, but also the prospects. But first of all, allow me to present who is GECF, who are we? We are an intergovernmental organization of 19 member countries and observers. We are sitting on 70% of the global gas proven gas reserves. We are contributing to 45% of the global gas production. And in terms of trade, we supply 64% of the pipeline gas trade and 54% of LNG trade. Now coming to our views on the gas market. So based on our outlook, we see that natural gas will be the only hydrocarbon that will see its share in the energy mix growing from 22% currently to 26%. And also we see that fossil fuels will continue to dominate with 76% share. So how is this distributed regionally? So we see here the preferences of energy mix across the different regions. But the common feature is that first, fossil fuels are dominating in all the regions, and renewable energy grew in all the regions, though at different paces. Now, a few words about energy policy, which is an important driver of gas demand. We have seen we have seen that energy policies, there are some energy policies which we see that are in favor of natural gas, such as the coal to gas switching policy and the phasing out of coal power plants. We see also that there are other policies that are not in the advantage of natural gas, such as the postponement of the reduction of nuclear power share in the electricity sector in France, or an aggressive penetration of renewable due to aggressive subsidies. Now, in terms of gas consumption, so in addition to the traditional major consuming regions, Asia and Europe, which are significant markets for GECF, we look at the emerging natural gas markets, ASEAN, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So for the Asian, though it is now a net exporter, but due to the increasing demand and also the reduction of the export of some traditional exporters, we see this region calling upon more natural gas. And also, it's important also to note that Bangladesh and Pakistan are emerging markets where opportunities for natural gas to grow is there. Now, in terms of niche sectors or emerging sectors, of course, the power generation sector is one of the driving of natural gas, but transportation sector is also an emerging sector, notably the NGV, where we see that NGV is helping in the quality of air, and also the LNG as a bunker fuel, notably in response to the IMO regulations related to the cap of sulfur content in bunkering fuels by 2020. According to our outlook, by 2040, sorry, demand for natural gas is expected to increase at an annual average rate of 1.7%, corresponding to an overall growth of almost 50%. And most of this demand will come from Asia Pacific, which will catch up with the US, with North America, to reach a share of global demand of 26% in 2040. And the power generation sector and transport sectors will be the biggest contributors to the incremental gas demand, accounting for almost 65% of the total demand in 2040. Now, if we look at the production which is needed to support such growing demand, first of all, contrary to what was expected in terms of an oversupplied market, the current global gas production of 3.7 TCM was able to be balanced by the growing demand driven by China. And the incremental gas production of 140 BCM was driven by GECF, which contributed with more than 60% to the incremental gas production. And of course, unconventional gas contributed to the increase, notably coming from North America. And there are plenty of resources that will sustain this growth. A few words about natural gas in the context of Sustainable Development Goals. We see that it is fitting to these objectives. It helps eradicating poverty, it helps improving the air quality, it helps to respond to the climate change issues, and it is an affordable and clean energy. Now, as far as security of gas demand and supply is concerned, we see that an equilibrium needs to be found to have a visibility on gas demand to justify the investment. And this could be reached through dialogue, cooperation, and investment. This leads me to enumerate some of the challenges for gas industry to reach such equilibrium. So first of all, we see that there is a lack of government support to promote natural gas consumption in some gas importing countries. There are insufficient gas infrastructure of distribution and transmission in some existing and emerging countries such as Bangladesh, India, Philippines, and Vietnam. And there is a timid global advocacy for natural gas for its environmental credential, and also the preference of some LNG buyers for shorter-term contracts, which is impacting developers from securing funds for some LNG projects. Ladies and gentlemen, a few words about where does GECF stand in the current market situation. I have talked earlier about the strength of GECF in terms of dominant position in terms of holding 70% of the world gas reserves. And GECF is determined to continue to supply sustainably the gas market thanks to its huge reserves and resources, its long experience in gas industry, long-term relationship with its partners. And in this regard, GECF is investing in infrastructure where by 2019-2020, GECF will bring more than 140 BCM of new pipeline capacities to supply Europe and China. And also in terms of LNG, GECF is at the eve of taking FID to provide to the market 86 million tons of new LNG capacities by 2023-2024. In conclusion, what we can say is that we recognize the importance of natural gas. We see that it is imperative to work together to promote natural gas as a fuel of choice for sustainable development through, notably, continuous dialogue with policymakers. And in this regard, GECF contributed to the discussion of the G20 in Bariloche, Argentina this year, where the communique of the G20 was in favor of natural gas, where they recognized the importance of natural gas for many of G20 countries, and they member states committed to endeavor to improve its transparency and competitiveness of gas markets. Second, enhance the cost competitiveness of natural gas, and this could be done through the Gas Research Institute, which is a new entity created within GECF. We are working on it, and this Gas Research Institute will work on new technologies that will help reducing cost of production and maximizing the value of gas. And the third, advocate the role of natural gas as the fuel of choice for sustainable development. And in this regard, GECF is going to deliver a message to COP24, where we will have the status of observer member. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Belheba, for that presentation, and beautifully timed too. Before we move on to our next speaker, I'd like to acknowledge in the room the presence of some distinguished guests who've joined us. I'd like to welcome Tufan Erhurman, the Prime Minister of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, as well as the Deputy Minister for Technology of the Republic of Turkey. Thank you both gentlemen for being here today. Hopefully you will find the rest of the discussions to be as interesting as the first two, and with that in mind, let's move straight on to our next distinguished speaker, Dr. Jan Frederik Braun, Strategic Energy Analyst. He joins us from the Hague Center for Strategic Studies in the Netherlands. Let's welcome him to the podium.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. So my name is Jan Frederik Braun from the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, and I would like to first of all thank the Alatia Foundation for actually organizing this panel. And also, like regarding gas, I would like to zoom in a bit on the importance of what's happening in the Netherlands and also what's happening in Europe, some more recent developments. So natural gas, let me first start with talking about the Netherlands. And there seems to be something wrong with the slides. There seems to be a problem with the slides. Can anybody assist me here?
Bear with us for one moment. We'll get the order correct in a second.
Yes, I think I see myself on the screen there. So let me start over again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Dutch and about the European situation regarding gas. First of all, about the Dutch situation. So natural gas has been at the center of the Dutch energy economy for about half a century. It is the 5th largest market in Europe, behind Germany, the UK, Italy, and Turkey. And in 2016, the Netherlands was the largest producer and exporter of natural gas in the European Union, and the 2nd largest regional gas producer and exporter next to Norway. Exports went primarily to Germany and to Belgium, and the Netherlands also exported to France, Italy, and the UK. Now there are two primary sources, or two really primary types of gas in the Netherlands. So there's a low calorific gas with a relatively large proportion of nitrogen, and there's high calorific gas from small fields, Dutch fields onshore and offshore. But something really quite peculiar has happened. So gas extraction in the Netherlands has fallen from about 80 billion cubic meters in 2013 to around 47 billion cubic meters in 2016. And the whole Dutch production surplus, that is the production minus demand, has fallen from 40 billion cubic meters in 2013 to about 10 billion cubic meters 3 years later. So experts have fallen off boats. High calorific gas will fall and disappear completely by 2020, and low calorific gas exports will disappear completely by 2030. Now, at the center of these developments is the developments of the supergiant Dutch Groningen gas field that's located in the north of the country. So basically, earlier this year, the Dutch government has decided to phase out production from this supergiant gas field, this to actually reduce the safety risks caused by earthquakes induced by gas production. And they have set a gas production ceiling of around 20 billion cubic meters. This is also coupled to a very strong domestic anti-gas mood in the Netherlands, and that's quite different from what you see basically globally and regional. We see gas as either a transition fuel or we see it as a destination fuel. But in the Netherlands, there's a very strong anti-gas mood going on due to the situation, what's happened in Groningen. There's also something else going on in the Netherlands at the moment. We have the so-called Dutch Climate Accord that's now in the stage of being negotiated, and the Netherlands has set a target of reducing its CO2 emissions by 49 million tons by 2030. And it's also taking measures to actually reduce the use of natural gas. So from 2021 onwards, all new houses and neighborhoods will not be connected to the gas grid anymore. At the same time, we're seeing that gas will remain a very important fuel for heating and also for power of the substantial Dutch petrochemical industry, and also for the whole decarbonization of the existing assets. And if you look at the industry target, that's quite interesting. So you see an industry target here of 14 million tons of CO2 emissions. Half of these reductions of the industry will have to take place via the process of carbon capture and storage, 7 million tons of CO2 by 2030. And CCS is seen in the Netherlands as a key technology for the future of gas. But at the same time, the whole successful application of CCS will require massive global upscaling, and we also need to bring down, and we also need to have a carbon price of at least 100 euros. Just to say it, and just to round off the Dutch perspective, gas is and will remain a major element in the Dutch energy mix. Despite the anti-gas mood in the Netherlands, we're seeing here actually two figures from 2015, where you see there's a large proportion of gas dominating the Dutch energy mix. And actually our center, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, we have made an estimation of what the Dutch energy mix would look like in 2030. And as a best case scenario for the renewables. And you see that there's still a huge proportion of gas there. So it will continue, in the next decade, it will continue to play a very important role. And that brings me to Europe. So the Dutch situation, the whole declining production and the increasing import dependence of gas, and also the importance of gas, characterizes the EU overall. And this graph here shows that the whole domestic gas production in Europe peaked around the year, basically around the year 2000, and that the EU saw its gas production decline by nearly half, 48% between 2030 and also 2016. The most recent World Energy Outlook predicts EU production in 2040 of around 45 billion cubic meters. But if we look at gas consumption, first of all, the role of gas varies widely across the EU. Germany, the UK, Italy, France, the Netherlands, and Spain, they are responsible for 75% of total EU demand of natural gas. And also this graph shows that after reaching a peak in around 2000 of around 545 billion cubic meters, gas demand declined for 4 consecutive years, mainly as a result of falling power demand and of competition from renewables and also lower cost coal. However, since 2014, lower gas prices have strengthened the EU's gas consumption, and it has grown 4 to 7% per year. And also over the next decade, the EU's climate and environmental policies, they will provide indirect support for gas. The reform of the so-called emissions trading scheme will definitely have the potential to increase the price of carbon emissions, thereby further encouraging fuel switching from coal to gas. And now, And if you look at the main suppliers from Europe, I mean, these are the two usual suspects, Russia and Norway. And the European Union is currently the world's largest importer of natural gas. And the whole continued decline in the domestic production mean that its reliance on import is set to increase. And Russia and Norway, they provide 75% of EU gas imports. And if we zoom in further, we also see another usual suspect, Germany. It has been consistently the biggest buyer of Russian gas, and it accounts for well over a third of these imports in the year 2016. And some other countries have been entirely dependent on Russia for their gas imports for a long time. So what we see, up to 2022, Europe is expected to face a 45 billion cubic meter gap between on the one hand, between the declining domestic supply and the flat demand growth profile. Now, this flat demand growth profile is expected to be met by a 6% increase in pipeline flows and 50% increase in LNG flows to offset the whole declining production. But the good news is that there's enough gas, and that we're seeing that actually Europe's total natural gas import capacity will increase by more than 20% by the year 2020. There's a lot of several Finnish planned and also a lot of new pipelines that are in the pipeline, so to speak. And we can speak of a globalization of the European gas market. So there's more integration with the world market via growing pipeline imports and a greater connection to LNG. And also a stronger tendency to move away from 20-year oil index contracts towards increasing spot pricing and more flexible and short-term contracts across the EU. There are also some challenges, though, regarding the competition between gas, coal, and renewables. Europe is going for more renewables, and there's, of course, an EU-wide binding target of 32% by the year 2030, and a CO2 reduction target of 45%. But the Netherlands is way behind in meeting these renewable targets, so they massively need to scale up what they sort of have to do in this area. The status of coal in Europe: coal is losing to renewables. We're seeing phase-out targets in 9 countries. They have announced their phase-out by the year 2030. And in Germany, the phase-out of coal is under discussion now, and I expect the phase-out of no later than mid-2020s to the year 2030. Last but not least, I would like to conclude. What will be the role of gas in the future? Well, we need to do a lot more, regarding proper renewable policy, and I would like to save my other remarks for the discussion, and I would like to give the word to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Jan Frederik Braun, for that presentation, which gives us quite an interesting look into the developments in the European gas market. And I know some of the projects which Dr. Jan touched upon there have been in the headlines or involved countries and projects which have been in the headlines lately. So there's, I'm sure, plenty of questions for us to pursue there when we come to Q&A, question and answer time at the end. So please put your thinking caps on, take your notes, and we'll get ready for Q&A shortly. Before we get to Q&A, though, it's our pleasure to listen to our next speaker, Gulmira Rizayeva. She's a research associate at Oxford Institute for Energy Studies in the United Kingdom. Let's welcome her here up to the podium to address us then.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Chair. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here today and speak about the gas supplies from Azerbaijan. I will be speaking on the Azerbaijani perspectives and gas export from my country. We'll focus mainly on the Southern Gas Corridor. I'm sure that many of you have heard about this project. So it's first time ever Azerbaijan will tap up the Caspian natural gas resources for Europe. And we will start exporting gas to Europe starting from end of 2020. So I will not go too much into details about the Southern Gas Corridor project. I'm sure many of you knows about this project. So in this slide, I put the gas delivery costs from Azerbaijan to the European and Turkish markets. As you know, the Southern Gas Corridor has several segments. It's the upstream project, which is the giant Shah Deniz field, which has started exporting gas first time in 2006 to Georgia and Turkey. And the gas from the second stage of this giant field will actually has been already commissioned this summer. And Turkey in July has already received first molecules from the second stage of this giant field. So Europe will get the gas from the end of 2020. So the cost of gas, we try to calculate what will be the cost of gas given all these segments, the upstream project and the midstream, which includes the South Caucasus pipeline, Trans-Anatolian natural gas pipeline, TANAP, and the Trans-Adriatic natural gas pipeline, which is TAP. So we actually calculated the cost of delivery of this gas to Turkey and Europe based on the data available on public domain. And as you can see in the figure, the cost of this gas in Turkey will be around $150, and in Europe it's around $250. This project is backed politically by the European Union and by many European countries, especially those countries where this gas will flow. And three European countries, Italy, Greece and Bulgaria, will receive gas from Azerbaijan. Italy has all these countries have already signed the sales and purchase agreement with the Shah Deniz gas suppliers and partners, and Italy will get 8 BCM of gas per annum, Bulgaria 1 BCM, and Greece 1 BCM. So, of course, all these new projects, alternative projects, the new projects, the gas coming from new sources via the new routes is extremely important for Europe in line with the European policy of diversification. Diversification away from one major single supplier. In all these three countries, this supplier is Russian Gazprom. So Gazprom has a dominant position in all three countries. And in order to look what will be the level of diversification of these countries by importing gas from Azerbaijan, we did this chart, and this shows that this shows the gas supplies from Russia, from Gazprom, and the gas supplies from Azerbaijan. And if you look at this figure, you can see that the 8 BCM of gas which will flow to Italy from Azerbaijan will make around 33% of Gazprom's gas market in Italy. So in Bulgaria, in Greece, this figure is 34%, which is 34% of what Greece will be importing from Azerbaijan of one single major gas supplier market share. And in Bulgaria, this figure is 33%. So all these three countries will be able to diversify their gas imports from one major single suppliers for 1/3. And I think this is quite a figure to say that will be a quite successful project to help these countries to diversify their supply sources. There's a major question whether Azerbaijan will be able to fill the very scalable pipelines, which are up to, the scalability of TANAP, Trans-Anatolian gas pipeline, is 30 plus BCM. So how these pipelines will be filled then? Because in order to make them commercially viable, you have to run the pipeline full. This chart shows the gas production in Azerbaijan and already committed export volumes and gas demand. So according to our calculations, Azerbaijan will have some extra extra 10 BCM of gas in the future to export to Turkey and Europe. So currently it will be around 16%, and if add to this around 10 BCM. So in the mid and long run, we will be able to increase the export volumes by 26 BCM. The Turkish gas market is the most financially viable market for Azerbaijani gas because of the geographic proximity and also because of the higher gas price. So in Turkey, the gas prices are higher for 20% than in Europe, and that's why this market is extremely attractive for Azerbaijan. But Turkish market is changing as the Turkish government energy and mining policy includes three main pillars, which is security of supply, localization, diversification, and the market predictability. So all these things are done in order to ensure supply securities and to meet growing demand. Actually, in Turkey, gas demand was declining in last 2 years, but only last year, in 2017, the demand raised to around 16%. So we assume that gas demand in Turkey will be growing in a slow pace, around 5 to 6% per annum in average rate. Going back to the Turkish natural gas strategy, is Turkey currently trying to diversify supply routes, as well as investing a lot in expanding the receiving infrastructure's capacity, daily send-out capacities, and expanding not only LNG receiving terminals capacity, but also potash gas transmission systems capacities, building new FSRUs, expanding storage capacities, etc. So this will definitely strengthen Turkey's hand in the negotiations with the current traditional suppliers, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Russia, to renew the contracts, long-term contracts with those countries, because all of them are expiring in the 2020s. We think that the EU market is the second most attractive market for the Azerbaijani gas, and the gas import for the EU market will be actually growing because the indigenous gas supply in Europe, gas production in Europe is declining, and the EU market, the European gas consumers will need to import more gas to meet the demand. Although demand will be growing on a slow pace, around 1.5 or 2% per year, but because of the decline of indigenous production, Europe will increase its imports. And this gas will come from the new sources, from the alternative sources via the new routes. And the Southern Gas Corridor provides such an opportunity for the European countries to import gas from the new sources. Of course, LNG is another alternative for the European consumers, and we think that Azerbaijan and its partners are entering very complex gas market in Europe in terms of supply-demand dynamics, in terms of competition, and as well as price and pricing. But I think this is the right time to enter the European market simply because there will be more market niche for the new suppliers in Europe, and we need to try to meet all the conditions to be able to compete with the current traditional and new suppliers in order to gain market niche in Europe. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gulmira, for that presentation. And wow, another presentation which I'm sure brings to mind a lot of questions and comments, no doubt, especially thank you for outlining the continued diversification of Turkish capacity and what impact that may have on the overall situation with the international gas trade. We'll try and get the slides in order here. While we do that, let me invite up to the podium our next speaker, and as they say, last but not least, Robin Mills, the CEO of Qamar Energy, from the United Arab Emirates. Let's welcome him.
Thank you for the introduction, Sami, and thanks to everybody for being here for this interesting section of discussions. And I think we've been able to cover the gas market in a number of key regions. And I'm going to move on to talk about the gas market in the Middle East and try to put that in a global context. And Middle East gas, of course, Middle East is one of the key regions globally, along with the former Soviet Union as a holder of gas resources, gas production, and gas exports. And the pattern of global gas markets has been changing significantly in recent years. And I wanted to show here how the Middle East's role as a gas exporter is evolving compared to other regions. So if we go back a few years, we had a world where the Middle East was an important gas exporting region, and so was, of course, the former Soviet Union, and Europe was an important importer, and North America was also an important importer and seemed to be a growing importer. What has changed since then is a few things. North America has turned around and is going to be a major gas exporter, and it is already exporting significant amounts of gas because of the US shale revolution. And Asia has emerged as a very important gas consumer and gas importer, and that's particularly driven by China, but also driven by other countries. It will be driven more by India and the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia as well in future. And so these are a couple of major changes in the global gas dynamics. And the part that the Middle East plays in this, really, the Middle East is seen here as being a continuing significant exporter, a growing exporter, but one that is facing increasing competition from the Middle East, from North America as an exporter, and from its own domestic consumption. So the Middle East has also become an important consuming region. And the question for the next few years, really, in the Middle East is, will the very large increase in production that is forecast be enough to keep up with domestic demand, and so to allow exports to continue growing as well? Now, around the world, there are many new gas supply sources, and some of these are very competitive and with lower costs. And I mentioned the US, an increasingly important LNG exporter, and with many, many projects on the drawing books, and some of these will come to reality and some won't. There have also been major discoveries in Africa, in Northwest Africa and in East Africa, Mozambique and so on, which will come in as LNG exporters. And there are various other LNG developments around the world. We saw a recent decision by Canada to move ahead with its LNG export project targeting Asia. And we've seen in Russia the very successful Yamal project up in the Arctic. So new and innovative LNG export projects are coming in. And the Middle East has to be able to compete with these and be able to continue bringing new gas supplies to the market at competitive costs. Okay, and I just apologize, the clicker's a bit slow here. And the LNG market is becoming globalized. So more and more countries are becoming LNG exporters, and I mentioned countries in Africa. Also, more and more countries are becoming LNG importers. And I've shown here countries which are importing LNG or considering doing so. And it's quite remarkable. You'll see almost every country with a coastline, if it doesn't export LNG, it's thinking about importing it. Even in Africa, many small African markets that a few years ago you would never thought would be viable LNG importing markets are now seriously considering it. And not all of these will succeed, but some of them will. And so this is creating a much more liquid LNG market in which there are many more sellers, there are many more buyers, and there are many more trading companies in the middle. And this is leading Middle East countries as well to consider their LNG strategies and to become more active in trading LNG, to become more active in developing new LNG projects, and to look at participating in other parts of the value chain. And you have decisions by Qatar Petroleum, for example, to invest in LNG in the US. And I think that's just one sign, and we will see others with talks by Saudi Aramco to invest in LNG in Russia, even up in the Arctic, quite a surprising place. So we're seeing Middle East countries diversifying their own gas strategies as well. Now, in terms of the Middle East gas itself, the reserves are still amongst the world's largest and most cost competitive. And that's particularly true if you talk about the North Field in Qatar or the equivalent, the South Pars Field in Iran, the world's largest gas field, and gas that can be produced at very low costs. And we've seen a recent decision by Qatargas to expand its LNG capacity initially from 78 million tons per year now to 100 million tons, and now to go beyond that to 110 million tons. So there's really no problem meeting domestic demand at the right price and with the right amount of investment. However, some countries, and particularly I'm looking here at Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, are facing much higher costs for their new gas supplies. New gas supplies are sour, it's containing hydrogen sulfide, which is expensive to process, or they are deep, or they're tight, or low permeability reservoirs, shale reservoirs like those in the US. So higher cost fields that will demand higher domestic gas prices. And if domestic gas prices have to rise to cover these new costs, will we see domestic demand growth in the Middle East slowing down? Will new petrochemical industries find it hard to be competitive if gas prices regionally are rising? We've seen the Middle East interestingly emerge in recent years as an important LNG import region. Of course, it still overall is a massive LNG exporter on a net basis, mostly from Qatar. But several countries have become LNG importers. Kuwait and the UAE back in 2010, and now in the next few years we will see Bahrain, we will see Sharjah in the UAE, Lebanon possibly, Saudi Arabia possibly becoming LNG importers as well. If we look at Egypt in the region, Egypt was a significant LNG exporter. It then ran short of domestic gas. It became an importer. Now it's made some gas discoveries, and it's going back to being at least self-sufficient or a small exporter again. But as gas prices rise and as new gas becomes more challenging, technically challenging and higher cost, there's more competition for gas in the region. We heard about competition for gas in Europe. The same is happening in the Middle East. So we're seeing competitions from improved efficiency in gas use, from nuclear power, at least in the UAE, for coal in several countries, and particularly across the whole region from renewables. Solar power, to some extent wind, but very much solar power has become a very competitive energy source across the region, not surprisingly a very sunny region. And so we have to ask, what is the major gas producer's vision for the long-term future of their resource? I mentioned solar power costs falling, so these are bids that have been made for solar power projects in the Middle East and in some other world record-breaking countries, mostly in Latin America. And we've seen just in a few years solar power costs falling from about 6 cents a kilowatt hour back in 2014. Then we were seeing bids at around 3 cents. Now we're seeing bids at about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And I think we would expect in the next year or so we will see bids coming in below 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And that is competitive with electricity produced from gas, even at very, very low gas prices. Now, of course, solar power can't provide all energy needs. Of course, solar power needs backup from gas or something else. But nevertheless, solar power is becoming very competitive, and we're seeing the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, other countries in the region launching major solar power projects. And so that brings me to the question of what is the vision for the major Middle East gas resource holders for the future of their gas, and how is gas going to turn out globally? Now, possibly gas is just going to be a dead end as we move into a renewable future. Perhaps we won't have the golden age of gas that the International Energy Agency pointed to. This would happen if we go straight from coal to renewable energy, if there's a strong action on climate change, and if there's a high cost of LNG, so LNG isn't adopted as widely as we expect. The second vision, somewhere in the middle, a bridge fuel. So gas has a great role in this view up till 2040, and after 2040 or so, renewables take over more and more, batteries and so on improve so that we don't need gas backup. There's still a need for gas in industry and perhaps in transport. Carbon capture on gas in this case doesn't really succeed, so gas ultimately isn't compatible with long-term climate targets. And the third possibility is that gas is a destination fuel. Gas is a large part of the energy mix forever or indefinitely. In this case, carbon capture on gas is successful. We can use gas without putting CO2 into the atmosphere. We have a massive unconventional resource, of course, in North America, but we will find unconventional gas very widespread in the Middle East and in the former Soviet Union and elsewhere. And we may find that gas is a better way of powering industry and a better way of balancing demand and supply than with only working with variable renewables. And if the major Middle East gas resource holders want to make the most of their resource, this third vision is the one that they need to be pushing for. They need to be making their gas cost competitive, bringing it to market and making sure that it's as environmentally compatible as possible. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think we're now happy to go to the panel discussion.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Robin Mills there, for that presentation. This is the part now where we get to ask the distinguished panel some questions, and I know that they've generated a lot of interesting points for us to ponder further. Once again, in addition to our distinguished panel here that we've just heard from in terms of our speakers, remind you that we are delighted to also be joined up on the panel by Mr. Oleksiy Ivchenko. He's the former president of Naftogaz from Ukraine. I'd like to start, perhaps because time is short, by giving opportunity to the floor. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. We have a microphone standing by. We'll get a microphone to you so you can ask your question. I'd like to ask everybody to begin by introducing themselves in terms of their name and their professional affiliation. And just a reminder to everyone, since time is limited, we'd like to keep questions to the topic that we're discussing today, the international gas trade. Do we have any questions ready before I start kicking in with questions of my own? Okay, while you think it through, let me get the ball rolling and ask our distinguished panel. I put the question in general to any of the panelists up here who'd like to tackle this. Where is the real competition for gas coming from, do you think? Are we talking about coal or renewable energy, for example? Who would like to have a go at that one? Okay, shall I start? Robin, would you like to have a shot at that?
Yes, I think when you ask the question, where is the competition coming from, we also need to ask, what is the market for gas? That really gives us the key to the answer. That really gives us the key to the answer is where is the market? So, you know, gas is used in power generation, it is used in home heating, it is used in industry, possibly in the future it's used more and more in transport. And that gives us a clue to where the competition is. And I think at the moment gas is facing very, very strong competition in the power sector. Coal is still a very important fuel in Asia in particular. Renewables are becoming stronger and stronger in Europe and as I was saying, in the Middle East and elsewhere. So gas faces challenges, I think, in the power sector where it's at high cost. If gas is cheap, as in the US, it's fine. Gas is a very competitive fuel. Where it's higher cost, it finds it difficult to compete. Where gas is very strong is still, and it doesn't really have any substitutes, is in industry and in home heating. If you look at Europe in particular, and in North America, gas is just indispensable for heating. Renewable electricity will not replace gas for heating very easily for decades to come. And so this is where gas has a very strong market and can defend its position. But as I say, in the power sector, we're really talking about the old coal and the new renewables. That's the competition.
All right, do we have any questions from the floor yet? If you do, please raise your hand, and we'll try and get a microphone to you. Let me ask the question while we're thinking. Oh, I think, was that the gentleman there? Did you have a question, sir? Did you have a question, sir? I thought I saw it. Yes, I thought I saw your hand go up. Okay, well, let me ask the question. I'd like to pose it to both Dr. Yan and to Gulmira. Where do you think prices are heading in Europe in the next 5 years, given the sort of supply situation of gas in the short term that I think both of you touched upon? Shall we say ladies first, and perhaps Gulmira have a stab at it? Don't worry, Dr. Yan, we'll give you a chance as well to weigh in on that one.
Well, as you know, all the long-term contracts in Europe, I think you mean Europe or Turkey? Did you say Turkey or Europe?
Europe, but you know, Turkey is on the continent too, and it is very much connected to the continent. So please
Yeah.
go ahead from that perspective as well.
Yeah, well, if we start with Turkey, in terms of price, this country is, I think, one of the most attractive natural gas market for all the suppliers around, especially for Azerbaijan, because gas prices here have been higher for around 15-20% than in Europe. And although the Turkey's gas supplies is more or less diversified, Turkey receives gas based on long-term contracts from 3 countries, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia, and all these contracts, gas price in these contracts are fixed to oil price. So this could be one reason, and LNG price in this country is even higher than the pipeline gas price for around 10%. So obviously, the preference is to import pipe gas, but during the winter peak demand period, Turkey increased its LNG imports in order to meet the growing demand within this period of time. So I think that this situation with price in this country may change in the 2020s when all the long-term gas contracts with its traditional suppliers will be expired, and Turkey soon will has already started negotiations to renew the contract with Azerbaijan to receive gas from the first phase of the Shah Deniz field. And because Turkey initiated a new projects to expand its gas receiving infrastructure's capacity, it has now more a chance and opportunities to import gas from various sources, including LNG and spot LNG and long-term LNG. So Turkey.
So Gulmira, when you say it's going to change how? Can we put some numbers on it and see if Dr. Yan on the recipient end of the supply chain agrees with that? How do you, when you said that you see that prices are going to change in the 2020s?
Well, yes, because Turkey will be in a position to negotiate better prices with its suppliers to renew the contracts. And Turkey had a chance to improve the contract terms, including the price. And I think that Turkey will get better price in next few years for its market. And well, in terms of Europe, in Europe situation is a little bit different. Here we have competition. It's not only gas to gas in competition, but it's gas to coal, gas to renewables, gas to pipe, gas to LNG competition. So all these factors will affect the price in Europe in longer term perspective.
Okay, can I invite Dr. Yan briefly, and then I'd like to give also Dr. Ivchenko as well a brief opportunity, and then we'll come to you if we may, because we have also a gentleman in the front row with a question. So let's try and keep the answers brief. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Dr. Yan.
So the thing that I also mentioned in my presentation is that lower gas prices have strengthened the EU's gas competition, the EU's gas consumption. And I think it's going to be a mixture of both markets and policy, and you're seeing basically in Europe that like these coal phase-out targets, there's a stronger competition for renewables, but I think that gas will play a continuing role in the energy mix, not only of the Netherlands, but if you look at Germany, for example, they are going to have a coal phase-out target sooner or later. Now, what is going to be the backup? They don't have any nuclear, they have a lot of renewables, so they will definitely need gas. That's that's a very good example.
Okay, the heat is coming down on us to move swiftly. So I'm going to, because we promised the gentleman, can you briefly pose your question, sir, and then maybe we'll give the speakers a chance to weigh in on that, and then we're probably going to have to wrap. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Dr. Osman Kaldırım from Delta Oil Company. My question is to Dr. Yang. Especially in your presentation, you were talking about a declining natural gas production in Norway, and your reasoning was because of the pressure on the policy of CO2 consumption in the country.
Not in Norway, it was in the Netherlands.
Yeah, Netherlands. I'm sorry, not North.
I mean,
Netherlands,
it's
yes.
it's
Yeah.
like very close by, but
Yeah,
yeah.
Netherlands. And I assume your concern in Netherlands is also is the same concern all over Europe for the environmental and CO2 related issues. How your production is declining, but at the same time, demand is there. How are you going to compensate for that demand without having natural gas?
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
very briefly, Dr. Yan, then I want to give
Yes.
an opportunity for.
Yeah, so the thing I mentioned in my presentation, I think a lot of our demand will like definitely come from Russia via, of course, pipeline gas. The question there is again the greenhouse gas footprint of pipeline gas, and also because we are going to really try to for maximum decarbonization. So there's going to be new issues raised there, but most of our demand will be met via, of course, increasing pipeline gas.
Yeah, but still you are using the natural gas, even though it's coming from pipeline versus from your reservoir.
Okay, let's make this the
Same
final,
thing.
if we could,
Yeah.
question. I would like to give Dr. Ivchenko an opportunity to weigh in with some thoughts, since we're talking about the changing international gas trade scene. Dr. Ivchenko, of course, Ukraine is an important route and player in the gas market. Your thoughts on where the changing international gas trade leaves your country? Briefly, I'm sorry to say. We do have translation into Turkish. Go ahead, sir.
Дякую за запитання. В Україні ми розглядаємо питання енергетичних ресурсів в контексті енергетичної безпеки.
Ukrayna'daki enerji
Глобальної
konuları hakkında,
енергетичної безпеки на європейському континенті.
yani Avrupa kıtasındaki Ukrayna enerjisiyle ilgili 10 yıl önceki Ukrayna'yı bugünle kıyaslarsak %70 enerji gaz Ukrayna gazının %70'ini Ukrayna kendi çıkarıyordu. Bugün yine %70 gazımızı çıkartıyoruz, %30'unu da dağıtıyoruz.
За рахунок чого це вдалося в Україні? За рахунок нарощування власних запасів енергоресурсів, за рахунок нарощування видобутку.
Bizim Ukrayna'nın kendi gazımızı kendimiz çıkarmamız lazım. Fakat mevcut durumlardan dolayı gazımızı çıkartamıyoruz.
Розглядати питання торгівлі енергоресурсами в контексті глобальної енергетичної безпеки. Сьогодні на нинішньому саміті ми представляємо країни Європейського континенту.
Bugün itibariyle biz Ukrayna olarak Avrupa'yı temsil ediyoruz, Avrupa kıtasını da temsil ediyoruz ve Amerika'yı da temsil ediyoruz.
Ми пропонуємо розглядати торгівлю енергоносіями за принципом сполучених посудин, за принципом партнерства.
Bizim için ülkemiz şu an bizim ülkemizin lehine olacak bütün ülkelerle partner olabilir.
Ті країни, які імпортують енергетичні ресурси.
Enerji eksport eden ülkelerle çalışabiliriz. Biz de onlara faydalı olacağımıza inanıyorum.
Не повинні використовувати енергетичні ресурси як зброю по відношенню до країн, які є імпортозалежними.
Enerjisi olan ülkelerin bunu bir silah gibi kullanmaması gerekmektedir.
Особливо господарям саміту, турецьким партнерам
Türk partnerlerimize söyleyecek olacağım şeyler var.
розглядати питання торгівлі енергетичними ресурсами.
Can we make this the final point? Sorry, sir. Go ahead.
Я завершую. Не тільки в контексті диверсифікації імпорту енергоресурсів, але і в контексті нарощування власних запасів і власних ресурсів.
enerji eksportundan ziyade enerjiyi kendimiz üretmemiz gerektiğine inanıyorum. Bunu yaparken de son teknolojiden faydalanarak bunları çıkarmamız
Let's
lazım.
end on that positive note about how we can do business. As long as the business is good for everyone, we can be partners with everyone. That's a positive thought perhaps to end on. On behalf of the Abdullah bin Hamid Al Attiyah International Foundation, I'd like to thank our expert panelists today. Let's extend a warm hand to them. They will be available for more questions during the exhibition. Apologies to Belhaifa, we didn't get time for more input from you, but there is still the coffee break in which we can follow up on any thoughts. The discussions today and connections made, I think, demonstrate how think tanks such as the Al Attiyah International Foundation can make a significant contribution by convening global exports to explore some of the trends we've been talking about. Please follow the foundation on Twitter and LinkedIn for the latest insights and updates. Thank you very much. Let's extend a warm hand to the foundation and the organizers for this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you to our moderator and the panelists for their interesting presentations. This year, Bosphorus Summit has planted a tree in the name of our participants. May I kindly now invite former Ambassador, International Cooperation Platform Honorary Member, Mithat Rende, onto the stage to present their certificates to our distinguished guests. Dear guests, we won't be having a coffee break. Our next panel is about to start in 5 minutes.